If someone asked me, is 1,000 of Axelar's native token called AXL considered good? My response would be that even though nothing I say is financial advice and even though I'm not telling anyone to do anything, I would not find that disappointing to me because when I take a look at, let's say, maybe the idea of AXL going to the price of $10, now at that point, if that were to ever even happen, 1,000 AXL would hypothetically be worth 10 grand. Now, some people may be thinking, okay, who cares about 10 grand and all this? Well, if let's say I saved 50% of that in a make-believe scenario, so 5,000, right? And let's say I use that for the next cycle, and let's say for whatever reason during the next cycle that does hypothetically a 10x, so that becomes 50 grand. Now, some people may be thinking, okay, still, who cares about that? Well, a lot of my friends that I know out there, they would be very happy with that. And also, not to mention, a lot of my friends that I know out there, they don't have that much in their savings account, let alone their portfolio or whatever. And I think it's not more so about that being somewhat of a difficult amount to achieve, according to some people out there. However, what I see often than not when it comes to my friends is that their expenses are sky high. Like they travel consistently, which I think, it of course depends on a case by case basis, but sometimes they're spending way too much on traveling, they're eating out consistently, and they're having car payments. And these are for cars which I think are somewhat unnecessary. Like, why have a car that expensive? But again, if we consider, again, traveling, eating out consistently, car payments, which are very expensive, buying random nonsense, all these random depreciating assets or whatever. In the grand scheme of things, I don't see that many people out there that have, like, again, 50 grand in their savings or whatever, let alone their portfolio. So then, to me, I get it. Sometimes you like to say, oh, this is not all that amazing and all this. Well, look, it's going to be different on a case-by-case basis, but just from what I've observed, I wouldn't find that too disappointing, hypothetically. However, even besides that, keep in mind, AXL going to $10 is around a 26x from here. If Ethereum went to 10 grand, that's less than a 3x from here. If Bitcoin went to 300 grand, that's also less than a 3x from here. So to me, yes, Bitcoin and Ethereum has done hypothetically very well. But then at the same time, even if let's say AXL just went to the price of $5, so around a 13x from here, that is not something I would be like, oh yeah, I'm going to choose Bitcoin and Ethereum over this. That's not something I would do. However, that's just the way to take a look at it. My criteria when I look for a project is one with a decently sized market cap, with a good community, with pretty good exchange listings, but then that is not a microcap. And also something that is not some random dinosaur which could arguably have a very big market cap right now. That's not something I want to look for. So I look for something in between. And that's something like AXL, arguably for me in this case. I don't only just hold AXL, but I look for these more so type of projects that are in that sort of range that Axelar is in terms of popularity and also in terms of market cap when it comes to AXL. Now, granted, if I was looking for a microcap, this is not something I would be looking for, right? So then this is kind of the criteria, again, that I'm looking for. However, some people like to say, okay, $10, right? Who cares about that? Well, arguably at that point, considering current circulating supply, market cap would be around 10 billion. And I don't think that's such a crazy market cap. I mean, we've seen Dogecoin reach over 80 billion back in 2021. We saw Shiba Inu that year reach around 40 billion. And actually, during the peak of that bull run that year, there was around 300 million crypto owners, whereas right now we have over 600 million. So that's way more than before. And again, I'm not saying AXL is going to be more popular than that, than like, Shiba Inu or Dogecoin. But in terms of this market cap, I wouldn't even find that ridiculous, arguably, in my perspective. However, why am I still having the idea of maybe $10 on my mind? It's because I like the fundamentals when it comes to Axelar. And let me explain what the fundamentals are. Axelar is a Web3 interoperability platform. It's basically an open stack to connect all blockchains together. Now, some people may be thinking, okay, who cares about that? That's not even that interesting. Well, take a look at how Axelar, in my opinion, arguably, is sort of like a miniature version of Polkadot. And we've seen how well Polkadot has done historically speaking. Polkadot is a project that is heavily focused on interoperability. And I think there's a market for that. But then for the longest time possible, there wasn't really this recognizable number two besides Polkadot. And I like how Axelar is somewhat establishing itself as sort of that arguable number two, because I think the popularity is pretty decent, and I think the exchange listings are pretty okay when it comes to Excel. Now, let me explain real quick why interoperability is even a market that some projects probably are focused on. It's because I think there is a need for something like that. Like, for instance, if we take a look at many networks out there, many blockchains out there, arguably, many of them are lacking something called interoperability. The reason being is because since many of them are independent of one another, they cannot freely send data and value to each other, again, meaning that arguably in that case they lack interoperability. Like for instance, take a look at Bitcoin and Ethereum, a very popular example, right? They're both very massive projects, but because they're both independent of one another, they cannot freely send data and value to each other. Arguably, they lack interoperability. So again, in the grand scheme of things, I think having interoperability is more so of a benefit than lacking interoperability, if that makes sense. So I think that when it comes to Axelar, it does serve a pretty good purpose. And logically speaking, I think if I were to assume that this space could hypothetically grow moving forward, I would naturally think that there's going to be more blockchains that are going to pop up, more networks, and arguably, I think, a pretty good amount would probably want to be interoperable. So I don't think something like Axelar has bad fundamentals or something like that. It may not be the coolest project out there because it may not have the most hype or the most attention, but in terms of utility, I think it's there. And I think that this isn't a type of project that's going to disappear when the fans or hype is not there, arguably, because there's actually utility, in my opinion. Now, if we take a look at Axelar, there's currently over 50 blockchains connected with, again, Axelar, which do include something like Avalanche, Moonbeam, Say, Cosmos, BNB Chain. We take a look at even Coinbase's layer 2 network called Base. We take a look at Arbitrum, Ethereum, and many others. So that's a pretty impressive resume, in my opinion. And also, if we take a look at it, Axelar allegedly has had partnerships with something like Onyx, which is by JP Morgan, Microsoft, and even MasterCard. So again, I like the whole vibe here. And I think that's very impressive, actually. Not to mention, Axelar, on its ecosystem, there are projects related to NFTs, decentralized finance, and as well as gaming. So overall, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think Axelar is that bad to me. And as of right now, all I'm doing is just dollar cost averaging, holding, and just waiting. And that's pretty much about it. I am not concerned about the exact moment in time. I'm just more so preparing for a moment in time. Again, if that makes sense, because some people out there like to ask me, why don't I pull up a price chart, draw some random triangle and all this? Well, if I draw a random triangle, I draw a falling wedge pattern on a price chart. Do you think the market's going to care about that? No, I don't think it will care at all, actually. And also, I see some people out there, pull up a price chart, draw some random triangle, and they say, oh, what's going to happen at this time and this time. It doesn't happen. And then they just keep adjusting the triangle. Now, at that point, that's just drawing. I'm not into that. I'm into just taking a look at the fundamentals, taking a look at just projects that I find interesting, and just staying patient, and that's about it. And feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I would greatly appreciate it. It's Malik the Captain, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.